Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the SME 10X Ask the Expert series. For all of you joining us today, a huge thank you. In our first edition, you heard from Bianca Gracias, who spoke about the legal implications of the current situation on SMEs. Based on the feedback we received, we're bringing you today a second expert who's going to talk a little bit about how to balance the two most critical aspects of any business, which is people and costs. So please, it's my pleasure to welcome you, our next expert, Suzanne Gandy, co-founder and principal of Changeosity.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, thank you to the SME 10X team for providing this platform and bringing us all together. I'm Suzanne from Changeosity. We're a Dubai-based boutique consultancy firm with over 70 years of leadership experience, including 30 in the Middle East. Our proven leadership models transform leadership, culture, strategy, and decision-making, making a sustainable business growth and purpose. My expertise is in leadership and organizational change. I have a master's in strategic HR and a bachelor's in psychology. And as a former British Army officer, having experience leading under intense pressure on 2 operational tours, before pursuing my career in human resources, I can absolutely understand the anxiety that business leaders are going through at the moment. So the purpose of this session is to highlight the areas you can practically focus on, but it's not meant for direct legal or financial advice. I'm neither a lawyer nor an accountant. It's merely meant as informative to provoke thought about the options open to you. And we'll be taking questions throughout the digital media platforms. So let's begin. May I have the first slide, please? Businesses have been catapulted into a situation with little chance of preparation. Many businesses have emergency plans followed by the business continuity plans. However, presently we find we've been catapulted into a situation of something of a magnitude and nature that we couldn't have expected. So today I will cover some of the practical steps you can be taking right now to minimize the short and the long-term damage this pandemic could do to your business. So let's consider some of those present concerns. There's widespread uncertainty about the length and the depth of the impact this pandemic will have on businesses. Businesses are attempting to satisfy existing obligations from a limited cash flow, and there's mounting concern over long-term projected revenues. Increased pressures on meeting fixed employee costs without sustained revenue, and lower productivity of managers and employees due to the feelings of isolation, demotivation, insecurity, and of course, employees fearing job loss makes them anxious and unproductive. There are, and there may be a lack of expertise internally in your organization to help you navigate through to ensure you reduce the long-term liabilities on your business. Basically, there's lots of questions and not very many answers, and there's challenge in every direction. So how can we make swift changes to our organizations to ensure the long-term sustainability, reduce resources without cutting too deep? And by that, I mean looking at where we can cut the fat, but not the muscle of a business. Understanding the regulatory environment, and of course, how this can help you limit your long-term legal and employee liabilities. And of course, limiting the psychological impact of this change on you and your remaining employees, but also, how you're treating those outgoing employees in this unfortunate situation. So let's move to the slide of cost of uncertainty. In the first webinar, Bianca Gracias from Suits and Advisors law firm talked extensively about the legal landscape, especially with respect to legal options available to you, such as settlement agreement with suppliers, relooking at contracts and fortifying them with clauses under the Small Claims Court in DIFC, looking at the insurance you have on your business and see if there's any claims you could make, along with legal obligations that you have to your employees whilst immediately trying to reduce your costs. If only we look at the business and the psychological costs, then you may run the risk of cutting too deep and doing permanent damage to your employer reputation and your employee relationships. And let's be honest, the disgruntled employees, ex-employees, are the ones who raise court actions. If only the business and psychological costs are considered, then you're missing an opportunity to minimize people costs for the long-term sustainability of the business. And like I said earlier, now's the time to reduce the fat, but definitely not the muscle. And if only the people and psychological costs are considered, you are overlooking the potential to negotiate in all areas of your business, particularly in light of the widespread industry and government-backed concessions aimed at improving long-term sustainability. So, of course, I'm sure you've already all done it, but the first thing we need to be doing is calculating how many months you've got. How long can you really sustain this current situation? And what's your projection of what you have in the pipeline of orders for your business? If it's less than 6 months, you really need to be considering taking some larger scale changes and start making them immediately. Looking at all aspects of your business costs. And once you've reviewed the business costs, then start focusing on the people costs. And then, of course, looking at the impact of everything that will ensure your sustainability. So let's go more into that balancing of the business costs. Having open and honest discussions about the pain points affecting your business with your shareholders and your senior management team is critical right now. If you're a sole leader in an organization with autonomy over decision making, then you are carrying the weight on your shoulders alone. So this is where I would say a practical solution is to consider joining a virtual peer-to-peer board. So you don't have to face those problems alone, and you can share your problems and issues in a confidential environment and leverage collective experience of your board. We run peer-to-peer boards and are finding that more than ever, our members are really reaping the benefits of having that support to help them find solutions. Bianca, in our last webinar, also gave some incredible advice about being active in your approach to emerging business issues. Start generating options for mutually agreeable solutions such as payment breaks, bank repayments, and of course, looking at varying your terms of business with suppliers, approaching your landlords, especially if you're in free zones. There's a number of concessions that have been made, utility providers, and any contracts you have in place, and off-hire any equipment that you have immediately. If you're not using it, you can rehire it down the line when you have a need, when it's a burning need. Equally, consider some of the equipment that you have that you're not using right now that could be used by those businesses who are really under pressure at the moment. So be looking at any sort of technical equipment you might have, even office furnitures you could send out to your employees, printers, all those sorts of things that you can help keep your business moving forward during this time. Now, with regard to any debts that are waiting to be settled, reach out to those customers, because if they haven't already paid in the time frame, they are probably struggling too. So this is where Bianca's excellent advice about a settlement process comes in really handy. And of course, she also mentioned the DIFC small claims court for amounts sub 1 million dirhams. So also consider replacing some of your suppliers with low-cost outsourcing. We'll come on to the employees and outsourcing there as well, but also looking at automation and looking at alternative suppliers. So consider pivoting the business model towards online and delivery options where possible, and spend your time proactively right now reaching out to your network to ensure you are maximizing potential for future orders when everything does pick up again. You really want to be supplying whatever you can right now to keep the business moving forward. And I always say one step at a time. Don't try and race forward, just keep going one step at a time. A good example of pivoting the business model would be an events company that have booking and call center capability. And they've partnered with a client who are really under a lot of pressure right now, provide more call center operators for their customers because they know the business so well. So it is an opportunity to get a little creative and to reach out to your customers to find out if there's a way that you could collaborate together. Equally, let's look at now moving on to balancing the people cost, because there's many options available to you. Oh, back one slide, still on the people costs. There are many options available to you, especially in light of the recently issued resolution 279 of 2020 regarding employment of the private sector. This was a resolution that was quickly brought in as a result of the COVID pandemic. Now, Bianca covered a number of options that I'll quickly recap on. And I have to remind you that if you are going to be making any changes to working relationships that affect current employment contract, such as reduced pay, or things like getting employees to take unpaid leave, these have to be mutually agreed and backed up in writing and signed to say they're agreed. Addendums to existing contracts or completely new contracts will be the best way to reduce your liabilities here. So let's look at how you're getting the productivity out of your employees right now. You will have already had to swiftly implement working from home or remote working. Some of your staff may still be going in if they're seen as key workers, but make sure you're having a call with all of your team at least twice a week and focus on what must be done, what should be done, and what could be done. Identify and quickly solve problems, prioritize and plan, and have a strict agenda for each call that you make. Use video calls, but have a strict agenda so you don't go too much off topic. And I say use video calls because it's a great way as a leader to check people's body language and to really see how they're getting on. So I would say, as one of my practical tips, definitely keep the video on, but maybe the mute button when people aren't talking. Basically, don't waste money. You are continuing to pay for employees to be productive. If they're not being productive, let's be honest, we have to be looking at our cash flow. Now, you're paying for the must do and should do goals. You know, that's the expectation of the employer-employee relationship. You've employed them for what they must do and also what they should be doing really in their role. The could do goals, whether you set them daily or weekly, this is when your high performers really start to shine. So then when we're looking at the redundancies, we can, and we'll come on to that very difficult choice later, you can better ascertain who is performing and who is not. So before redundancies, I would say consider other options available to you as an employer. So because when you start to ramp up again and businesses start to recover, you want to have the bench strength to immediately react to meet those demands. So consider asking people to take their paid leave right now, because then when things do pick up, you're not going to have people on annual leave and you are not going to find yourself short-staffed. So paid leave is probably one of the most go-to first things that you can do. You can also do unpaid leave, which is now legal. It has to be agreed. But remember, if you provide physical housing and food, you have to continue to do so. Reducing wages for a temporary period, again, has to be agreed, but consider the implications on someone's end of service or their gratuity, however you like to call it, and therefore their motivation to sign a reduction in their salary. So you may want to do right by the end of service that people have already accumulated. Ultimately, if it is a permanent reduction, you need to be reissuing those contracts, either under the Ministry of Human Resources and Emmortization or under the Free Zone Authority. That's the way you're going to limit your long-term liabilities. Some other ideas might be to actually allow your employees to do part-time employment elsewhere. We now have a part-time employment law up to a maximum of 40 hours a week. Currently, they wouldn't be, some employees can't work when they're not in the office or in your facility. So you could consider giving them the option to go out and do some part-time work. And of course, then that means you can keep that person on your visa. You can bring them back when the market recovers. and that person gets to continue to earn some money during this difficult time. Another thing is you could look at some of your business partnership agreements that you have with some of your customers. And if you know some of your customers are really struggling right now, they're very, very busy. I'm sure most organizations that do deliveries right now are very busy. Again, you could look at loaning some of your employees on an NOC, so they have this opportunity to keep earning. And again, that sort of reduces your concern about them not having any income during this time. So consider also, unfortunately, cancelling any nice to have allowances, such as flight allowance. Now, it might not go down very well. It might be a contract written into your contract, so it's a contractual change. So remember the advice from earlier. But you could put them on hold for the foreseeable future. But whatever you do, do it fairly. Do it for everybody and track everything and back it up in writing. And of course, blanket communications are not good enough. When you may end up in a court down the line. So just make sure you're putting the extra effort in to make sure you're having the right communications going out to your employees, and get an expert to help you. Now let's move on to the difficult decisions of deciding who to keep and who to let go, which is probably one of the most difficult, tough things a leader has to do in a business. Now, for redundancy, if it's unavoidable, if it's not avoidable, make sure you've chosen employees who are the fat and not the muscle of your organization. And by this, I mean, consider, do they make your life easier by them being in the business? Do they look forwards and into the future, or are they constantly looking backwards and talking about their past successes? Do they are they bought into the why of your organization? You know, are they passionate about it when you've got a hold of their hearts and their minds as a leader, you know, or are they just in your organization for a monthly paycheck? What do their performance appraisals say? And also look if you've had any disciplinary issues with them in the past. These are all things that you need to be taking into account, looking at those consistent good performers that are the backbone of your organization. And of course, when all is said and done, our decisions will be judged. So make sure you're basing them on non-bias, objective parameters, so you can show why you chose Bob to be retained, yet you chose Jim to be made redundant. And it might be really hard if you've built up very strong personal relationships with these people while you've been working with them over many years. But you have to look at how can you sustain the business for its future growth, because in the future, as your business does recover, resurrect and grow, you'll be able to employ more people. So you want to be able to get back to that point. So, of course, make sure, and it's often one of the most important things I say when I'm talking to SME business leaders, is knowing the true cost of each of your employees. Often we just remember, okay, but what's their salary, and sort of think about that sort of cost. But actually, remember, in addition to monthly salary, you've got mounting end of service liabilities, gratuity liabilities. You have health insurance costs, visa costs, and of course, if you're supporting them with their dependents, you're supporting their spouse and children as well. Now, of course, that really pulls on the heartstrings, and obviously it can be really difficult to then decide, you know, when you know someone's got a wife and children. But go back to the long term of your business. Go back to the number of people you will be able to employ again in the future, and the impact that's going to have on wider society. So remember your work to work off true employee costs, not just the salary. Now, of course, termination of contract has to be in writing. And also bear in mind, it's recently become apparent that when employees who have been made redundant or have taken a salary reduction or have been asked to go on unpaid leave, go to their banks and ask for some concessions, maybe with loan repayments or things like that, the banks are asking for documentation to point directly towards the fact that that change in their circumstances is a result of circumstances surrounding COVID-19. So when you are doing your documentation, it might be worth your while mentioning it, because then you don't have to duplicate documentation when the employee comes back to you and says, oh, look, but now I need this letter for my bank. Now, be careful not to cut too deep. Consider if you want to rehire into that role in the future, if you can't automate it, for example. How scarce is that skill set in the market? Like, how long did it take you to originally find that person with that skill set? I say skill set, of course, I'm a big believer in you hire for people's enthusiasm, for their dedication, and for them being bought into the why of the organization, and you can teach the skills, but you may not have that luxury moving forward. So really have a think about, can you afford that rehire process in time and in money when the market picks up again? You know, it is going to be an employer's market. It's already starting to be an employer's market. There's a lot of redundancies that are occurring, which means that you're fishing from a well-stocked pond as an employer. But is there exactly the type of person in that pond? And that's something to consider when you are looking at making redundancies being the last resort after the paid leave, the unpaid leave, the reduction in salary, yada, yada, yada. But, you know, make sure that you're not actually making a decision that you might learn to regret later. And of course, you can calculate how much it's going to cost you by looking at how long did it take you to hire that role before. So how much is that role of value to your organization? But equally, how much pressure is that then putting on all the employees around that particular role that you may not be paying them for? How much more pressure is it putting on you? And then calculate the percentage wise. Well, it's putting 10% extra on this person in my finance department. It's putting 20% extra probably on this person in my sales department. And you can do a really swift financial analysis to then decide, actually, is it worth me keeping the person? Or is it worth me letting the person go? And of course, I'm more than happy to go into some ways of analysing the costs of, you know, the redundancy now and the rehire later. My email will be shared at the end. So you can also explore other ways of retaining skills. There is a big shift in the future of work towards freelancers. And freelancers, I have heard that there are some entities coming live in this part of the world as well for freelancers, but there is, you know, you just have to Google freelancing websites, and, you know, there's freelancer.com, there's Fiverr, there's all these ones where you can look, and Changeosity ourselves for all our design and all our graphics. We have a lovely lady in Indonesia who does all our graphics. And again, it means that you're not taking on that employer liability, but you can give somebody meaningful work. Also, have a look at something, if it's a repetitive role like monthly accounting, you know, doing your monthly reporting, have a look at your accountancy system, because there's probably already functionality built into that accounting system and into your HR system that will auto-generate reporting if you just turn it on and get those reports sent to your email. Equally, look at some roles like PA roles. For example, we don't have a PA function in Changeosity. We use a booking website. I wish I'd known about these booking websites when I used to do an awful lot of recruitment, because the back and forth, just arranging a meeting or an interview, can break your head and your inbox. So these are the sorts of things we use. Simply Meet Me. There are so many little business tools that you can use to improve your productivity and automation in all the tiny areas of your business. And before you know it, all those detailed areas will build up to make a much more efficient process. And you can re-roll someone like a PA into more meaningful work. Now, before I move on to the psychological costs, let's look at any labour dispute matters. And I would always suggest that your first point of contact should be Tawfiq Services, which represent the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. And it's 860. That's the number that you ring, and they're there to help. But of course, you can also reach out to some experts in the market. So now we're going to move on to the balancing the psychological costs. And I understand that business leaders are under immeasurable pressure, and this can cloud decision making. So it's the optimum time to seek support through channels like peer-to-peer advisory boards, like I said earlier, which are meant for the SME industry, executive coaching or business coaching, or just seeking out some sessions with external expertise. You don't have to face these issues alone. You know, these decisions that you have to make as a business leader can consume you, and they can cause physical and mental detriment to you long term. So an example from a recent peer-to-peer board, for example, when people came together as a community, was they all shared how they're looking at reducing the people costs in their business. So everybody walked away with this laundry list of different ideas that they could look at for their business. Now, employees are really experiencing a lot of anxiety, and this is anxiety about their future. So right now, collaborative leadership, bringing people together, caring about your employees, will improve transparency and trust. If you need to, seek support through leading through change. I know my business partners and I, welcome, sessions with people to help them overcome any of their current issues. Try to make, a little piece of advice is, try to make every interaction you have with your team, whether it's in a group or individually, as positive, as inspiring, and as fun as possible. Remember that you have to lead yourself first, and before you can lead others. So use this time to your development, not your detriment, and role model that to your team members. So some ideas might be to encourage online learning, and maybe, getting people into online learning. There's free stuff and paid for stuff out there. There's YouTube is brilliant. There's also a lot of membership websites that you can sign up to. But you could ask an employee to report back to all the other employees about the key takeaways that they learned and share that really positive experience. You could also start your meetings with all your team members by asking your team members just one thing they're grateful for that day. It might be something small, like their online delivery arrived and they've got groceries, or it might be something bigger, like they're enjoying spending more time with their family. But it's a great way to get everybody into a focus of being grateful and getting some more perspective. You could also do things like a 5-minute meditation at the end of a meeting, do some breathing exercises, or have pop quizzes to get the creative juices flowing on a Sunday morning. Challenge your teams to a step challenge, or physical workouts while you're all in isolation. And I don't know, send the winner a healthy meal or something like that. Also, since we're all in each other's homes and you're in my lounge today, in which I've made an office, you could introduce your children to your co-workers' children. I know that we did that the other day, and it was really lovely for the kids to all say hi to each other and realize, mom or dad work with lots of other people who have kids too. And so it gives your children and the people that you're living with a bit more sense of perspective as well. I would suggest that you use work channels for discussion to keep a separation with your private home channels. So Teams is great for that. The chat on Teams. You might have Slack, or there's just tons of brilliant collaboration tools out there that you can be using. So my final point here is to make sure that you too switch off and reboot yourself, even if it's for half a day or a whole day on a weekend. Now's not the time for command and control leadership. In fact, now the time is to take a leap of faith in adopting new leadership processes and practices that are focused on people. I go back to the must do, should do, could do goals, because if you can get your team members to set their own goals, then you're no longer in command and control. You're actually empowering the team member to come up with their own goals for that week or that day. But then if you get them to share it on a Teams call, they're now accountable to the rest of the team. Because not only did they come up with the goal, now they've told everyone what they're planning on doing. So if they don't do it, they'll feel that real sense of, oh my God, okay, and now I'm really accountable. So also remember that varying employee contracts and making people redundant has huge psychological consequences for the individual and their co-workers. And this is where I would say, don't just rely on your existing office manager or HR function to do all the dirty work. I would suggest that the repercussions may come back on you. So to always engage with an expert to help you through that process, and seek that professional support to make sure that your leavers leave with dignity. And too many times I've seen the consequences of when these situations are handled badly. I get phone calls from friends and family, and people go into self-preservation. So they'll go into fight mode or flight mode. And what you really don't want is an ex-employee in fight mode, because it will make your life hell. So make sure you engage the experts. And of course, helping people through that redundancy process with career counseling, reach out to people like us who can help with their social profiles, their CVs, interview techniques, all those things that they will need moving forward. You can almost give it as a gift to your leavers. So I'm mindful of time, so let's move on to post-quarantine. So had you realized that post-quarantine, our new normal is already forming? And organizations are responding in the hope that they emerge out of this situation without too much damage to their people, their business, and their customers. So organizations really need to be focusing on employee engagement, morale of their people, reducing burn rates and managing cash flows, strengthening technology and digital infrastructure, and some of those neat little business tools that improve lots of bits of productivity across the organization to support their business. And of course, looking at your logistics supply chain, suppliers, customer link. And I'd like to just walk you quickly through Resurrect before we go into questions, because it's something that EMA Partners developed. And I think it's a super acronym to leave you with as my summary. So the E is for engaging. And of course, besides keeping the morale of your employees, keep the morale of your customers and having those conversations during this time. R is for regroup. The future should be with a mixture of caution and optimism, defined accountabilities and prudent resource allocation. The E is for engage, not just with your employees, but with your customers and suppliers alike. And personal, empathetic conversations right now will go a long way. Leaders at all levels need to be consciously communicating the why to your employees to engage them with the purpose of every activity they're doing right now. S is for simplify, look inwards, declutter processes, declutter structures, bureaucracy. The bureaucracy will really shine when you're under pressure. Will really shine as in will really bubble to the surface when you're under pressure and you're not there to sign something or approve something. So this is when it's really important to go, well, hang on a minute, is that working for our business? And if it's not, find a better way. And of course, simplify. If there is a way of creating better customers, better value for your customers, then absolutely simplify the process to make it faster. U is for unlearn, because what worked well previously may not work well now and potentially won't work well in the future. Instead, have a look at what's working really well right now. Embrace a bit more autonomy and let go of that command and control mindset that we've all learned, and look into being more collaborative as a leader. And of course, use the must do, should do, could do goals. R is for revitalize. Of course, the leader plays a big role in orchestrating those internal synergies between the function and the business leaders within the organization. And this is where you can revitalize through hiring, Also getting rid of those non-core and non-performing assets, both people and equipment. Remember, the fat, not the muscle. And look at a blueprint for the future as well. R is reimagine the post-COVID world. And it's fundamental to focus on talent, processes, and business outcomes. And then E is for eliminate. Eliminate negative energy through positive and transparent work culture to create better efficiencies across the organization. It's important to eliminate toxic behavior. Your strongest financial performer may not come out on top once you quantify their true cost impact on the fact that people leave because of them. So you're having to rehire, you're actually getting attrition, perhaps because of one of those managers, and there's lost productivity, because if they're a command and control style leader, their people will be doing the minimum not to get fired, not the maximum because they want to. And C is for communicate. Obviously, two-way leadership down right now is a great way to connect on a personal basis with all your teams. And organization-wide communication, if done right, not only fosters strong understanding and trust, but it strengthens the relationships amongst teams. And finally, T for transform. True transformation is when your frontline employees undertake initiatives to drive change in alignment with the vision of leadership. If that's happening, then you've got the creativity, the innovation, and the transformative mindset in your front line. If it's not happening, that's when I would definitely suggest reaching out to some people who can help you make that happen. So in summary, compassion blended with resilience will be a fundamental element that most capable leaders will be exhibiting to get through this current challenge. Hiring at the leadership level must be focused more on leadership capability rather than the domain expertise, and digital transformation across organizations and adopting a future of work mindset will help new skills evolve. The times are interesting and challenging, and the world will not be the same. Good and fundamentally resilient organizations will resurrect. So thank you to EMA Partners for that wonderful acronym. I now open it up to questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan. That was a very comprehensive and great presentation. I think there were some really good insights in there. Susan, while you were presenting, the team and I were, crunching all the questions that we were getting. So we were live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube. And I'd like to, without any further ado, just kind of jump into the first question that I have through social media. So let's see what the first question is. It's coming in from Madhukar Chaturvedi through Facebook. And he asks, do you think remote working will become 100% a way of life? And if it does, what's your opinion on productivity if about 70 to 80% of the workforce is working from home?
Well, that's a really good question. And what's interesting is that working from home for many organizations is not new. And those organizations that had already adopted some of those future of work practices will be the ones that prevail, because it's minimum upset to their employees. This is a culture that they're used to. And people are then the leaders are then focusing more about output rather than presence in an office, because someone can be highly unproductive by dragging themselves into an office, making the whole day a tea party, watching YouTube at their desk, let's be honest, and then clocking out at the end of the day. Whereas, I think a lot of leaders think, well, if I can't see my employees, I can't trust them, that they might not be doing their work. And that's where I think leaders have to really change their mindset towards productivity rather than presence, physical presence. And I think the region is probably a little slower to adopt these future of work practices. I know some organizations in this region have, adopted them a long time back, but I do believe that a lot of employees aren't going to want to go back to the old ways of working. And that's when we can really use this time to demonstrate to leaders in businesses that we are equally as productive, if not more productive, whilst we are working remotely. So they actually have no reason to demand that we're back to the 5 days a week, 8 till 6 timings in the office. Where you look at the research in this particular space, organizations tend to find a sweet spot around 1 to 2 working remote days per week, which is when they will find the most productivity. So could I say it's going to go to 70 to 80% working from home? I think that would very much depend on the role. There are some roles that do require a presence, a physical presence. But I think right now is the opportunity for employees to really prove their productivity while they're remote, and for leaders to be using things like the must do, should do, could do goal setting process. So they're kept updated on who are the employees that do the must do and the should do, and they're getting real value for money. And then who are the employees that are doing the could do, and they're the top performers.
Super, thank you. I hope that answered your question, Madhukar. So another question, Susan, I think you touched upon the new normal in your presentation, talking about how things would look like post the current situation. So we have a question coming in from Sudhir via Facebook that asks, how do SMEs need to change after COVID recovery?
It's, again, a really good question. And it depends on how that SME is currently being run at the moment. If the SME is very dependent on one person, one leader, and if that leader's not there, God forbid they were struck down with COVID, what would happen to the organization? So for SMEs especially, I think it's a great opportunity for leaders of SMEs to really look at where they've delegated responsibility and trust within their teams. So if they are absent, and it can happen in larger organizations as well, where everyone is they won't do anything unless their leader tells them. That, like I said, if a frontline employee can take a decision and is empowered to take a decision to keep the business moving forward, then I think SMEs are really headed in the right direction. The other area I think SMEs really need to change is looking at adopting more technology if they don't already have it. Like I said, it can be expensive CRM systems, so you don't have to go to the filing cabinet and and the documents to see where everything is. Well, actually, CRM systems don't need to be expensive. We use one, and we're a very small organization at the moment, but it's scalable. We use small business tools to help improve our efficiencies. So as experts in our field, we're not bogged down in administration. And I think these are the areas where SMEs should really look at changing post-COVID recovery if they're not already having to change right now. I hope that answers.
Thank you. So, Susan, another area where we're getting a few questions coming in is around, from an employee's perspective, the redundancies that are happening. And I have a question coming in that's coming through Facebook from Shabaz Alam, and he asks, in the current situation where people are losing their jobs, what can employees do, and who can they reach out to? I know you answered this in your presentation. If you can just shed some light on this once again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is where it really concerns me that employers may not be living up to their responsibilities with respect to doing right by an employee that they have to make redundant. Now, of course, if the balance sheet makes it, unavoidable that redundancies have to be made, the employer does have a moral and ethical obligation to that employee to make sure that they help that employee with moving forward in their career. Now, I say an ethical and moral responsibility because there isn't actually a legal responsibility. But like I said, unhappy employees will either get into fight or flight mode. I would definitely suggest that employees who have concerns about the way they've been treated reach out to Taufik. You too can ring the hotline, which is 860. And you could also reach out to your line manager or even directly to your HR department and ask them, what can you help me with through this very difficult time? Do you have any career counselors? Do you have any websites that you would suggest that I go to for finding another job? Their recruitment department will probably be using multiple platforms to find employees. Well, of course, it's great if you know that information of what platforms to put yourself on so other employees can find you. If you have been made redundant, then you just need to make sure that you're getting all your legal financial dues. And that's definitely when to reach out to the Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization. That's 860 number. But also, if you're being put on unpaid leave, but you are housed and fed by your employer directly, then they still have an obligation to do that for you too. So it's difficult. You could approach your employer and you could offer that you would take unpaid leave during this time. So when the market does recover, you're first in the line out of all the other employees who took the redundancy option. It's worth asking your HR department, are there any other avenues that you would, as an individual, be willing to take right now to help? I also mentioned that if an employer is suggest or requesting that their employee goes on unpaid leave, employers can get a bit more creative and use the part-time employment law and look at some of their customers or some of their wider network where their employees could go and help another company during this difficult time. So because at the end of the day, whenever there's a crisis, there's always going to be those organizations of people who lose out, but there's also going to be huge opportunity for businesses that are very busy during this time, like I think I mentioned delivery organizations, healthcare organizations, insurance organizations. So you could also ask your employer if they would be okay and sign to say that you could go and get some part-time work in the meantime. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it definitely does. So, Susan, I have another question coming in because we're on the subject of unpaid leave. I'm just going to pick this up from YouTube. It's coming in from George, and he asks, is it fine to ask employees to utilize their annual leaves during the COVID-19 without creating any panic among them? I think you've just answered this question. So, George, I hope you've heard what Susan had to say. But Susan, on this question, maybe perhaps you can talk a little bit about how can employers structure it in a way that they have a proper plan in place for asking employees to take their annual leave.
Yeah, it's right now there is a difference between the resolution that was published in response to the current pandemic and of course the labor law. Now previously unpaid leave it was silent. It didn't exist in the labor law. But of course leave does, and the technicalities are that you can, as an employer, request when your employees go on leave if the business dictates that. Now, of course, you're asking employees to take paid annual leave. And I know that one of the concerns is creating panic. Well, in fact, if you tell them that you want them to take their leave so you can retain them, but have them back when the business recovers, that's a really positive story to go out to your employees with. Now, of course, from the employer perspective on how to structure it, of course, if you make everyone take their annual leave now, what happens at Christmas? And what happens in the new year when the new year's worth of annual leave comes in? You might find that everybody suddenly wants to take annual leave in January or over Christmas. So now's the time to engage your employees and put it out to them and say, look, we want to have the bench strength when the market recovers, that we can keep the stability of the business moving forward. And we don't want to lose out post lockdown because of this. And plea to the employees that this is a way to keep the business sustainable, because if it's not sustainable, then ultimately the employees are going to be the ones that lose out too. So just be mindful that if you do get everyone to utilize their annual leave now, look at what happens down the line. So it might be worthwhile making sure that you have a core team that don't take their annual leave right now, that you keep working on productive tasks, and that they're the ones that then can take the annual leave in December and January, and you sort of you have a little bit of leeway rather than sending everybody off, because as soon as that new year of leave comes in, everyone's going to want to take leave. One of the areas you might find you have issue with is because some people want to travel for their leave. Well, obviously, no one's going anywhere right now. And the likelihood is that people might be a little averse to traveling over the summer anyway. So I definitely look at where are the peak times usually in your business, and just make sure you've got full staffing at your normal peak times. I hope that helps.
Super. Yeah, I think that was really good. I'm trying to pick up questions from everyone, but I have another good question from George, and I'm really tempted to take another one from him. So, Susan, he asks, since obviously the HR is at the center of all of this, and they are the ones communicating this.
Yeah.
How does the HR take care of themselves? You being an HR practitioner yourself,
yeah.
What is your advice to the HR teams? I think this is a fantastic question.
It is a really good question and very close to my heart, because whenever difficult decisions are made by the leadership, ultimately it often falls down to the HR practitioners to do the dirty work. And it's both physically and psychologically and emotionally exhausting. Now, in order to take care of yourself, I would always suggest take care of others. Treat people with empathy. Because if you treat people with empathy, then you're less likely to bear the brunt of their emotions. And when I say emotions, I mean their anger. Take time over the discussions that you're having with respect to redundancies when it comes to those individual discussions, because ultimately time spent then, the pain, dare I say then, will mean that you have less pain later on. The person might need to say everything they've got to say, but you're ultimately self-preserving yourself down the line with them not giving you such a hard time when it comes to, booking the flights home, if you have to do that, or, doing the final settlement calculations. So there's an element of self-preservation from an HR perspective to have those difficult but empathetic conversations now with people to reduce your pain later on. Equally, reach out to other HR practitioners. I'm here. My email is going to be shared at the end. I always say when you get HR people around a table, it ends up being a counselling session because we all go through the same issues. We all deal with the same problems. So don't try and face it alone. Reach out to your community of practice in HR and, just talk. And that's what I would say are probably the best ways that HR people can take care of themselves right now.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I'd also like to take this opportunity to add that we will be sharing Susan and my details at the end of the session, so that if any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask us post the session, you can get in touch with us. I'm also trying to be a bit mindful of time here, so I'm going to pick up two last questions, Susan. I have a question coming in through YouTube, and it's coming from Ara, who asks, how can we measure an employee's productivity while working from home?
Yeah, especially if it's the new working method. And that's, again, a really good question. Well, the first way, if you're going to measure anything, you have to make sure you know what you're trying to measure and have really good KPIs. So if working from home becomes the new norm, then if, say, for example, somebody is in sales, you want to be making sure that your CRM system captures what I would call the hard measurement KPIs. So if it's a call center operator, for example, there is going to be certain hard measures that you can put in place. But of course, make sure that what you're measuring is the right measurement? I mean, is that really a sign of productivity? Is that really a sign of quality of work, not just quantity of work? And these are the discussions that you'd need to be having with line managers. The second way is, I'm just a massive fan, and I've probably said it a few times through the presentation, is the must do, should do, and could do goals. Every day, if the individual is required to set themselves the must do goal, maybe a couple of should do and a few could do goals, and then at the end of the day, they report back to their line manager on how they got on. At the end of the day, the must do goal is a non-negotiable, because it's called a must do goal for that day. It has to be done. The should do goal is where you're thinking, okay, this person's not an underperformer. They're not only doing what they must do, but they're also doing what they should do. And then if you have some could do's, you'll be able to start measuring who are filtering up into that high performance category and who are staying in the average performer category and who are doing the bare minimum category. And you could administer this on something like a collaboration tool like Teams, or even on an Excel spreadsheet. Get the person to measure themselves, give themselves a 1 out of 5 score at the end of the week, for example, on how they progressed. And then you start collecting scores week by week. Then you don't really need big end of year appraisals anymore, because what you're doing is continuous performance management, which is key for productivity when employees are working remotely. You might hear that a lot of large organizations are getting rid of their annual performance appraisal systems. Well, that's because they're adopting these continuous performance appraisal systems. And Ara, I'm more than happy to have a chat with you over the email or on a Zoom afterwards to talk you through the finer details, so you might be able to implement that in your organization.
Thanks, Susan. So I'm going to pick up one last question, and this is coming in from you. So Gina O'Hara asks, how does the peer-to-peer board work?
Yeah.
And is this a paid service?
Right. So yes, it is a paid service, but always the first meeting is for free, because it's kind of like a chemistry session, because now you're potentially joining a board. So not only you joining that board to help yourself, but you've also got to give back to the board members, because that's how boards work. Everybody contributes and everybody helps each other. So the first thing you need to have is an abundance mindset. The second thing is you'd never have a competing industry on the same board, because you want to make sure that you keep that safety and confidentiality of information as high as possible. And there's no reason for that board to create any friction. The third thing about the peer-to-peer boards is that we always have a process of identifying one particular area of the business that we would go through first. So we might choose the marketing plan or the business plan or the recruitment hiring plan, and the board would work together collectively, but focusing on their own businesses. Then you move into what we call the mastermind, and that's where before the meeting, one of the board members has said, look, I'd really like to mastermind a particular issue. It might be a problem or it might be a business opportunity, and they don't know what to do. So the facilitator of the board will then, send them some information where they have to really look into what is it that they're actually asking the board for. And it might be something like, how can I rapidly monetize my thought leadership online due to the current COVID situation? And the board would then have an opportunity to ask open questions to find out more. So, I think it was Einstein said, if you've got an hour to make a decision, spend 58 minutes asking questions to really get to what the core of the issue is. And then the board members all have to propose solutions for you. So basically, if you've got a board of, say, 9 members, you're being on that board as well, you're going to walk away with, maybe every board member gives you 2 solutions. So straight away, you're looking at, 16 plus solutions potentially to the issue that you've raised. And it means that you can go away and implement it. But here's the catch. you're accountable to implement it because it's a proper functioning board. So you have to come back next month and tell the board what you did. And of course, as an SME leader, where sometimes we can get sidetracked or, follow the next shiny thing, it's really good to have that accountability and also have an accountability partner that maybe calls you a week before the next board meeting and says, hey, Suzanne, you did the mastermind last week. These were the things that you said you were going to focus on. How are you getting on? Do you need any help? What support can I give you? And so it's monthly. The board meetings are monthly, but of course there's support in between. So that's how the boards work. And of course, reach out to me if you want some more information.
That's very intriguing, Susan. I think I'm going to be in touch with you regarding this after the session.
Great.
So I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you everyone that watched, and I hope you found the session useful. If we weren't able to pick up your question, please do get in touch with us. You have our emails on the screen, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you, Susan. You were wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who joined today.